Don't give the special kids sharp tools, they say. Why not? What could go wrong, I say? Welcome back, original gangsters. OG out here with you to show you something kind of cool that came to me in the mail recently. Full disclosure, this was sent to me by Toor Knives in San Diego, California. Yes, Toor Knives is based in San Diego. All of their knives are made right there in San Diego by military combat veterans. And I'm not a knife reviewer. I don't really know what I'm talking about when it comes to knives. I don't even know all the terminology for all the parts, but I'm a user of knives like a lot of you. I use fixed blade knives in a limited capacity, and of course folders almost every single day. Well, Toor Knives thought, why not send this clown on YouTube one of their new copies of the Egress. The Egress is a survival and rescue knife. It's not really a bushcrafting knife. I've been testing this thing for the last couple of months. I've taken it with me on quite a few road trips across Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and California. And I've put it to the test out there in the field, and I've found it's a pretty tough little piece of equipment. What's weird about that sheath? It's got a big giant hole in it. Well, the first thing you're going to notice when you take your Toor Knives Egress out of the box is the fact that it's got this big giant, what looks like a shark bite in the back of the blade. Kind of gives you the impression that it's one of those field dressing knives, you know, zipping open deer or cutting open fish. Toor Knives calls this their sear hook, the survival, escape, resistance, and evasion version of sear. So the sear hook, let's talk about this. The sear hook is a beveled, very sharpened little section here. I'm assuming, this being kind of a survival and rescue knife, that it's probably on there for cutting seat belts, that sort of thing. Drag it reverse against a seat belt. The actual little cuts across there, machine cuts, they look pretty badass. Now, I will say that they're not all that useful. These cuts across here, it's not exactly a saw. I've tried sawing through a couple of things, and it doesn't really work so much as a saw, but it would help you in grabbing a rope, in grabbing a seat belt, reaching out and grabbing at those little shark teeth bites right there would help draw that piece of material into that little hook and let you slash it. So I'm not sure how useful you would find that little thing. Here's what I will tell you about it. One of the drawbacks of this knife. This sheath was sent to me without any kind of clip. When you order your any knife from Toor Knives, you're going to specify in the drop-down box on their website what type of attachment clip you like. They have ulti-clips, they have thin ulti-clips, they have spring steel clips. Molly is one of them. For the time being, like any human, I place my hand on the sheath and go to draw the knife. Well, that little notch right there exposes their little sear hook. And as you can imagine, it's probably pretty handy when this knife is mounted either on load-bearing equipment or on your belt. You could probably reach down with cordage and just zip it off without unsheathing your knife. But as a guy who doesn't currently have a clip or a mount for this, I have found myself for the last few months stuffing this in my gear in some molly webbing or tie-down straps and just drawing this knife out. That all works, but when you're opening it by hand, I have put my hand on this knife before, and the goo on my hands tends to get down in that little notch as you're drawing the knife. And the other day when I pulled this knife out, the little sear hook zapped me right there on the meat of my hand and cut me a little bit. Big deal. So again, it's not how the knife and sheath was designed to be used. Toor Knives makes this knife out of a heavy, heavy piece of 1/4 inch steel. You can see the width of that steel on the spine of the blade. You can see it right there in the jimping, and of course it's full tang. Full tang means you get one big giant piece of steel all the way from the tip clear back to the end of the pommel. Hey, those two names I know. Back here on the pommel, you're also going to find a little 1/4 inch titanium, almost like a ball bearing, and that's going to be used for breaking glass. Again, probably to, being that the knife's name is Egress, probably to get yourself out of some kind of situation where you're trapped behind glass, probably in a telephone booth of some sort.
I'm in a glass case of emotion!
I wasn't able to test this on any car glass. I don't have any glass around me that I'm willing to break right now, but I will tell you that I tried this out on a piece of tile that I had sitting around, and boy, that little titanium ball bearing there on the end makes quick work of a piece of tile. So if that's any indication of what it's going to do to auto glass or any other kind of glass, then boy, that's a pretty effective, way more effective, I would say, than the normal pointed pommel, the little bone crusher, skull crusher, what they call it on a lot of knives. The scales on this knife are G10. They're crafted right there in the Toor factory, handcrafted. Each one of them is hand applied to each individual knife and then custom formed to the actual blade that they're going to go on. They're not just a big box of scales that they start throwing on knives. So you're going to see that this thing has a great little fit, nice smooth fit. You don't get any real hot edges. One other thing about some Toor knives that I've reviewed in the past is they had sort of sharp edges on that on the G10 scales. And as you're gripping the knife and working with the knife, you can actually get some little hot spots on your tiny, precious hands. Well, this one, they've eliminated all of those. It's nice and smooth on all of the edges. The scales are affixed to the knife with these little Torx head screws. And in all of the batoning and all of the work I've done with this, chopping wood or bashing on the top of it with a stick to baton a piece of wood, we're not able to get these scales loosened. They've held nice and tight, so I like that. If for some reason they ever did come loose, of course, you're going to take some blue Loctite, lock those suckers down, and get back to work. So I really like how heavy and sturdy this is. You got to think of this more, instead of like a fighting knife or some kind of a bushcraft knife, you got to think of this more as a tool. This knife with its heavy duty tip, it's got this nice drop down tip, kind of reminiscent of a tanto blade. It's got a chisel grind to it, both top and bottom. And with that heavy duty tip, you're going to get extreme tip strength. This is not something that you get with a lot of knives. I commonly carry on some of my lighter everyday backpacks. I carry a cold steel SRK. I've carried a Gerber strong arm. I've been able to break or bend the tips in most of my knives. Well, you're not going to break or bend this tip. I use this thing to not only pry my way through a bunch of wood, pry some pallets apart, but I recently tested it out by stabbing it as hard as I could into a steel electrical box cover. And let me tell you, I wasn't able to get through the steel, at least with my hand. If I had another tool to baton on this thing, I could have punched it right through the steel. But one thing it didn't do is affect this tip one bit. And that's not something you would do with any old standard hunting knife or fighting knife. While we're on that topic, fighting knives, I don't carry a knife like this thinking that I'm going to get into a knife fight. That's not why I carry a knife. It's probably not why you should be carrying a knife. I don't carry a folder thinking that it's going to be a weapon that I use to somehow defend myself. That's actually why I carry a firearm. That's probably why most of you carry a firearm. We're not out here thinking that we're going to get into some kind of Steven Seagal slap fight with our fixed blade knife or our folders. So don't think of this as some kind of fighting knife that you're going to go all Rambo on somebody. This is a tool, and it's a very useful tool. Let me show you some of its features. So the Egress has a full 1/4 inch steel, again, as I mentioned, from tip all the way through to pommel. So it's a full tang knife. It weighs in at about 10.6 ounces, so it's a nice hefty tool. Think of it as a pry bar with a sharpened edge. It's got a Rockwell hardness of 59 to 61, so I guess that's pretty dang hard. I don't know that much about Rockwell hardnesses, but it's a pretty decent blade. What I will tell you, being that you've got a 1/4 inch piece of steel right there, it's got to be ground down to a nice sharp chisel grind. Well, if you start out with a thinner piece of steel, you've got a little bit sharper knife. The angle comes in a little bit sharper on this. This thing does work for feathering a stick, for starting a fire or something like that. Again, you cannot get real fine cutting out of that tip, but I think it's far more useful actually with this big heavy duty pry bar tip than those little fine tips anyway, because I tend to break those fine tips off pretty quick, and then I'm left with just nothing but a big sharp screwdriver anyway. So let's go ahead and start out with that. It's got nice heavy duty jimping here on the back of the blade. Really gives you a good purchase for your thumb when you're working on something. I was cutting through some hose, and you can really get some good elbow grease on that knife using that. Boy, that is some of the best jimping cut I've ever seen on a knife. You do have to be careful, of course. One of the reasons you want that good jimping on there is so that your thumb doesn't slide forward and somehow end up in all that sear hook sharpness right there. Down here on the bottom of the blade, where the blade meets the handle, is what's called the choil, and that's a sharpened little beveled edge right there. I guess that could be used again for cutting a little bit smaller cordage or some kind of hose or something like that. It's got a slightly curved overall shape and a dual cut shape to the grip, allowing a nice good purchase with even big hands like mine. Allows you to get that index finger in there along with your index finger's friends. Another thing I don't know about is blade steels. This is evidently a very, well, I've had it out in all kinds of weather conditions. It's been wet in the sheath, it's been wet in the back of my truck, it's been wet as I carry it, and I haven't noticed any rusting on it. Again, we've really banged the shit out of this thing over the last few months. The blade steel on this thing is a CPM S35VN. I don't even know what that means, but I do know that it's a very durable knife. It's held very good edge retention. I have not tried to sharpen this knife yet, but it's held its edge very well. It's only now started to get a little dull. I mean, just a little. Needs to be stroked up a couple of times on a whetstone to sharpen this thing up. And you need to get a little ceramic rod, of course, to get in there and sharpen inside that little sear hook because of its weird angle. But whatever they do here, it's kind of like a Teflon finish. I don't even know what they do with this, but it's definitely not bare steel. The blade is 4.8 inches long, where the handle is 4.7 inches long. So it's just a perfect balance. I mean, it's a really well balanced, nice, heavy duty tool. So while you're thinking about it, let me address the elephant in the room. The price on Toor knives, they're custom made knives. They're handmade. Every single one of them is handmade. You can't say that about your Gerber knife or anything else that comes from China, but a handmade knife is going to command a handmade knife's price. So for those of you who say, oh gee, I could go to Walmart and get myself a knife for under $100 and it would serve me just fine. You're probably right. It will serve you just fine in most scenarios. But I will tell you, I've broken a lot of those knives. If you value really good tools and you have the extra ducats to spend, dropping them on something like this Toor Knives Egress is the way to go, because, well, it's just a really good tool. This thing, if you don't lose it, this thing will be with you the rest of your life. You probably just need to watch that your buddies aren't stealing it from you. They're all handmade, they're all handcrafted right there in their shop. So again, this is the kind of thing that not only is it guaranteed for life, but if you ever had a problem with such a thing like this, you would just get a hold of them right there. You're getting kind of a custom made one-off sort of knife for a production knife. So you'll have to determine whether a knife like this is worth the retail price. The retail price on this Egress, by the way, is running about $350 at the time of this filming. A lot of you are going to cringe at that. Okay, this is not a tool for you, but I spent a lot more money on a lot weaker gear, and you end up finding out later down the road that you sure wish you had dropped good coin on getting good gear. So like anything, you spend a couple extra dollars on good tools. You guys know good tools. And if you get good tools, you go out and get yourself some good DeWalt or Milwaukee equipment versus going to Walmart and getting some of that hyper tough shit. You know what the difference is in getting good equipment. You can go to Walmart, get yourself a $50 knife out of the glass case. It'll probably serve most of us because we're not going and kicking down doors in Fallujah anytime soon. However, if your job requires you to be out in the elements and you need a good pry tool, a good cutting tool of some sort, and you want a good quality piece of equipment that's going to last you the rest of your life, spend a few extra bucks. Take it from your Uncle OG. But you're getting more freedoms per eagle out of a knife like this than you are going to Walmart and buying a cheap $50 blade out of the glass case. If you're looking for a good survival or rescue knife, something to keep in the truck, something like me to keep in the side-by-side, this is a great little tool that can actually work as a great little pry bar, hell, screwdriver. It can do a lot of things that a little thinner blade, a lesser knife could not pull off without breaking. I want to thank Toor Knives for sending this out to me. Again, I didn't buy this, but I also don't receive any money for making knife reviews. I'm going to give you my honest impression as a knife user, not a knife professional. I'm not even a knife reviewer on YouTube, but I am a guy who uses knives, so I think I can tell you what works for me and what probably works for a lot of you, because most of you are just like me. You're doughy middle-aged dads who just have jobs and you're going to in the middle of the day, and you work hard for your money, so you want to get a good piece of equipment that's not going to shit the bed on you when you need it the most. By the way, I want to give a big shout out to my Patreon donors. Thank you very much for helping support OG's Danger Show on Patreon. And if you would like to join us, use the link down here in the description and help out OG's Danger Show with a little tiny pledge. Patreon donors get first dibs at any kind of swag like this that OG is not going to keep and use in my everyday carry rotation. And by the time you see this video, this knife is already going to be sent to a Patreon donor who has really been with us since the very beginning and has supported the show for quite a long time with quite a bit. So I think you definitely deserve something like this. I do send out most of the swag I get to Patreon donors. So join us down there in the description section if you'd like to help support OG's Danger Show. And thank you very much. Let me know below in the comment section if you like me doing knife reviews, if I should just stick to what I know, which is usually bagpipe playing and pole dancing. You guys let me know what you think down here in the comment section. I appreciate you guys stopping by. Give it a thumbs up and share the video around with your friends if you like it. If you're not already a subscriber, give it a little subscribe button down here below, and remember to tap the bell that says always so that you'll get notified anytime I upload more crap to YouTube. I thank you guys very much for stopping by. I've got to get back into town. Thanks for looking over this Toor knife Egress with me. I want to thank Toor Knives for sending it out to me. I think it's a good piece of kit. As you know, it's absolutely getting crazy out there. It's not just hyperbole anymore, but I want you guys to stay armed wherever and whenever you can. And until next video, OG out.